you all for coming. My name is Jennifer Remenchik, and I am a member of the exhibitions team here at the Brand and creator and moderator of Art Talks at Brand, an initiative in which contemporary artists from the Glendale and Greater Los Angeles area are invited to discuss their work and the issues that surround it, followed by a discussion with myself and a public Q&A. This program is free and open to the public, and I would like to take a moment to thank the Brand Associates for their generous support of this program. Ish Lipman is a Los Angeles-based artist. Lipman's paintings investigate the complexities of the sublime in relationship to the contemporary landscape. Drawing upon our growing alienation from the natural world, Lipman's paintings seek to explore this rift, aiming to examine the various anxieties and reveries that emerge from healing this inner divide. The paintings emerging from these investigations have a similar existence to those moments between sleeping and waking, where the world is colored with the aftertaste of a vivid dream. He graduated from UC Santa Cruz in 2018 and attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Drawing in 2019. He received his MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2022. Solo and two-person exhibitions include Harpers NYC, Harpers East Hampton, Long Story Short, Andrew Rafacz, Praz-Delavallade, in Los Angeles, and group exhibitions include Not in Miami, Not in New York, Make Room LA, and Hair and Nails. So please help me welcome Ish Lipman.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. So to begin with, I'm just going to start with a little bit of my background. I grew up in Los Angeles, California. Both of my parents are artists. This is a screenshot from one of my father's films called The Case of the Vanishing Gods. And then the next slide is, this is a screenshot from one of my mom's films. They're both experimental filmmakers. So that kind of entails that I grew up in maybe like a somewhat of a non-traditional atmosphere, to say the least. Like, I wasn't allowed to watch TV growing up. I was kind of encouraged instead to play in the garden and find other methods of entertainment. I went to like Waldorf schools, Quaker school, charter schools. I kind of did like the whole gambit of like the Los Angeles alternative education. Like, I kind of really went through what all that had to offer. And then when I was around 10, I got really into skateboarding. I was really uninterested in arts. That's what my parents did. I was kind of, I wanted to find my own lane. And so I would kind of build these like weird contraptions that I would skate off of in our garden, which my mom's here, I don't know. I was looking at this and I was like, how did you let me build this? There's like 5 cinder blocks that are stacked on a like basin and then like a very flimsy bench. And I was like jumping off of this into dirt, at least, instead of cement. But that was my creative outlet for like the first maybe like part of my life, like from about 10 to 20. All I did was skate. That was like, it was definitely a creative outlet, but I was uninterested in like painting, photography, anything else. And then as I reached the end of high school, I had to kind of make a decision of like, what am I gonna do now? And so at that point, all I wanted to do was skate. My parents were like, you need to go to college. So I went to Cal State LA, which is, not far away from here. And I quickly realized that I was not really equipped to do anything with like math, science. Like, I kind of quickly found that art felt like a natural home for me. And so I started out in photography. I got really into darkroom photography. My mom actually has a darkroom in the house I grew up in. So she taught me how to develop film myself, and then I quickly started exploring the darkroom at Cal State LA, and this is a double exposure photograph taken in Angelino Heights, which was like the first kind of like photographic project I did. And at this point I was like maybe like 18 or 19, kind of like still figuring things out. I was still really into skateboarding, but I had like my first major relationship, so I kind of like my worldview started to broaden a little bit. To the extent that I started like kind of branching out even at Cal State LA, and I took a lot of classes, like art history classes, and one of them in particular was a class on the Mexican muralists in Frida Kahlo. And that class particularly spoke to me. I think I really just was drawn to the imagery and the aspect that the art was kind of in conversation with the broader public. Just a few notes, like a lot of at the time of like Diego Rivera and Siqueiros and those other muralists, a lot of the population of Mexico City was actually illiterate because of there's vast educational problems. And so the murals were depicting these like political struggles that were happening, like the Mexican Revolution, and like it was basically kind of like the art was a vehicle that was helping the whole city assert its own identity. And I loved that there was that social aspect and that the paintings themselves were just like really amazing paintings. And so then around this time, I then kind of started to have my doubts about being in LA. I started kind of having like a quarter life crisis. So I was like, I don't really want to skateboard anymore. I kind of felt like I outgrew that like social milieu a little bit. And then basically, long story short, I like ended my relationship. I kind of stopped skateboarding and then spent a year just like applying to different schools. And I ended up transferring to UC Santa Cruz. And here's a photo of the campus at UC Santa Cruz. There's gonna be a lot of photos of like nature interspliced with this, because once I moved here, it kind of set a lot of things in motion. I was able to really kind of put my like first 20 years into perspective, which I know that sounds kind of maybe kind of an early age to have that type of like looking back and trying to figure things out, but the natural environment kind of produced this space in which I was able to really pull apart and like look at my identity and kind of figure out like what I wanted to do with my life. So I was like, okay, I have 2 years here because I transferred. And I was like, I'm just gonna really spend all of my time making art and like just see what comes of it. And if it works out, it works out. And if it seems like it doesn't, I'll figure something out when I graduate. And I was still doing photography at this time. I was looking a lot at like Diane Arbus, and then Golden, and like slightly more documentary-oriented artists. And then I had to take a painting class because I transferred. So there's kind of these like, there are these various like prerequisites set upon me. So after about like 3 months at Santa Cruz, I began to start painting, and my priorities started to shift. And all the while, I was kind of just walking through these landscapes every day. The school's in the middle of a redwood forest, and so I would actually walk up this path to go to school sometimes. I lived in this like kind of strange housing unit my second year, and so I'd have to have this walk. This is a photo of my friend Steven by the ocean in Santa Cruz. A lot of my time was literally just kind of spent hanging out in nature, not doing anything in particular, just kind of, that was kind of like, instead of going to a cafe, you would like go sit in the woods or like go sit in a car and look at the ocean. And then when I'd kind of go back to the house and start painting or, work on something. This is the photo of the housing unit I lived in, which was in an old limestone quarry that they'd used a lot of the limestone to build San Francisco. And so I was kind of like living down here and then like climbing out of my hole to go to class. And then around this time, I started looking at a lot of artists. This is a painting by Florian Stettheimer. And then this is kind of one of my early works. I started painting in my like tiny student apartment building, which was kind of like a crazy decision, but I really wanted my own space to work freely and unprovoked. And so I kind of just set up shop in here. It wasn't like this all the time. It was only like this when I set up the painting, and then I'd pack it up. And while I was here, I was kind of like, I started to like really catch up on like, I was only 21, but I was like, I really want to figure out where I stand artistically and like what influences draw me. So I would go to like the library most, like maybe not every day, but a lot of days, and just peruse the different art books, and then kind of go back to my studio and work it out. At that point too, my parents started recommending me a lot of different films. Here's a scene from Meshes of the Afternoon by Maya Deren. This was a film that I like just really loved. And so kind of through osmosis, I was really studying and looking through art history, and then in the studio just painting and trying to figure out, like, develop basically my own language. So this is another early painting. This was about like maybe about a year after I began painting. I was painting these like somewhat uncanny scenes that were like loosely inspired by my environment or kind of like things that happened to me. Like this, maybe in a week I like lost my wallet, and then I was having these like strange dreams and kind of just having like somewhat of like a, like a 22-year-old unsettled moment. And so I kind of did this painting in response to that. It's loosely me with the orange shirt in the background and the spilled coffee, and then the mysterious figure leaving the room. And then the fire in the background, which I feel like is another kind of, growing up in California, I feel like there's always kind of this slight presence of fire, and so I kind of wanted there to be something like menacing in this painting. I was also looking at Leonora Carrington. I also included this painting, which I think it's called The House Across. But they're all these kind of characters that are intersecting in the student housing building I was living in. Like the walls were paper thin, so this kind of almost reminded me of living in there, where I would like not see anyone, but hear all of these noises at night. Here's a photo in Capitola in Santa Cruz, and then here's a painting that I kind of made in response to that. So I began to look at the environment, not using, I mean, this was the most direct photographic reference I used, but the environment started to seep its way into my painting practice more and more thoroughly. And then after 2 years, it culminated in this exhibition, my graduation exhibition, which was just 3 of these paintings. And so then I was done with school, and I had to figure out like what to do next. So after school, my parents were really nice. They said, "Where do you want to go?" They took me on like a graduation trip as a present, and I said, "I want to go to Italy." And so we went to Assisi to see these the Giotto frescoes in the chapel there, which was like a really magical experience. And then I was back in LA for an extended period of time, and I ended up working for my mom, who was doing a magic lantern tour. For those of you who don't know what a magic lantern tour is, it's kind of like a antiquarian projector that's like you move slides through the projector and it's projected on the wall. She's here, so she can always correct me if I explain that badly afterwards. But I was her assistant, and so we went to Europe to do it in a few places, and I would help her move the slides through. It was basically kind of like doing a live show. So I did that for a few weeks. And while we were in Brussels, I saw this painting in person, which is Landscape with the Fall of Icarus by Bruegel, which is somewhat contested. People are not quite sure if he actually did this painting, but regardless, I really love this painting. And so then I got back to LA, and I finally was able to get my first studio. At that point, I was like figuring out what it meant to have a practice like outside of having critiques and conversations with other artists. But my friend's mom had like a shed in Echo Park that had these like amazing windows. It was definitely not up to code, but she gave it to me for free if I would do random chores for her around the house. So I would kind of like drive her to the airport, but I had a studio for free. And these are some of the paintings that I made there. The one in the middle is a direct reference to the Icarus painting, and then the other ones are kind of all water themed. So then I was back in LA for a few months, figuring out what I was going to do. I thought about applying to grad school, but then I got into the Skowhegan School of Painting and Drawing, which is a residency in Maine. And so then I shipped off to Maine for the summer. This was, I think, in 2019. And this is a photo of my studio and 2 of my friends. So once again, I was submerged in nature. My studio was like one of the furthest possible studios out in the campus. Like the campus is spread out over, I don't know how big it is, but it's like a pretty sprawling campus of these like studios that are just completely surrounded by nature. And so while I was there, I was kind of once again working very much in a natural environment. And at the time, I didn't know how to like make a box and ship my paintings back, which kind of, it's not that hard to figure out, but it was really daunting in the time. And so after painting for a little bit, the first couple weeks, I was like, I need to figure out something to work on while I'm here. So I just started doing these charcoal drawings on the wall. And I worked on that for most of the time I was there, and I ended up just covering all 4 corners of the wall in these charcoal drawings. Also at that time at Skowhegan, I hadn't really had any interaction with like the art world, like I guess maybe like capital A art world. Like I wasn't very familiar with galleries, even though I grew up around in the experimental film world, which is like very different than like the gallery world. You know, the experimental film world feels a little bit more like homegrown. There are film festivals, but I didn't really attend many film festivals when I was like 10, so I didn't really have an idea of like what it meant to be dealing with like a gallery. Like I didn't really understand like even like that there's like a 50-50 split, like all of these like basic things. And while I was at Skowhegan, I interacted with like a lot of artists who were like fully doing that already, which was like really helpful, but then also kind of a challenge. So I packed up there and went back to LA briefly, and then COVID occurred, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to grad school and get out of LA. So I then went to, I moved to Chicago and went to SAIC. And when I was there, my goal was to kind of like really figure out and like put to rest everything that I had like kind of like learned at Skowhegan. It was kind of like popping a bubble, and then I had to deal with the ramifications of that once I was there. And then pretty shortly after I got to SAIC, I met my wife, Christina, who's here now, who's also an artist. And we got together almost immediately. And so I spent my 2 years there just painting and hanging out with Christina. This was my studio there. At that time, I started looking at more architectural references. I was looking at a lot of the case study houses and examining a lot of like the kind of these ideas of like utopian architecture that was looking to bring the environment in and kind of maybe maintain a certain like austerity within the environment. I was really curious about those, especially having attended like all of these like Waldorf schools and kind of had like a taste of this like alternative hippie dream that like maybe didn't quite work out. But I still like liked the idea of like trying to reach for the utopia. And so I kind of started bringing that in with the paintings. And that's also where this kind of dissonance with the natural world came into being. So I was looking at these houses that had this very like grand idea of bringing the environment in, but the houses themselves aren't actually that like welcoming or cozy. And where it's almost like the house itself is almost like a psychological experiment that's designed for functionality, but not even that functional, since it's not comfortable to live in. And I was drawn to those places. I kind of felt that like almost mirrored my own experience with the natural world, where I like wanted to bring it in, but I was maybe not quite sure how to actually like make peace with it. And so here are some of those paintings that are kind of exploring that, where the figures are kind of on the threshold of something. They're not quite sure, like they're having some trouble kind of contemplating this divide. This is an exhibition I did with Christina. Her painting is at the end, and then on the one on the wall, and then my two are the two closest. And then after that, I graduated, and I pretty much went straight to showing and painting full time. I had like a lot of shows lined up out of grad school, which was very fortunate. And so I immediately suddenly was dealing with like, you know, figuring out what that means to be like a professional painter, in the sense that like I like relied on painting selling to pay my bills. These are some of the last paintings I did in grad school that were shown at Praz-Delavallade here in LA, which closed a few years ago. But this was like my first show out of grad school. And so this was kind of, I guess I felt maybe like my like emerging into, you know, showing full-time and painting full-time, which was, I had a lot of fun painting this show, which was also kind of, it started to veer more into the landscape, as you can kind of see here. And then here's a photo. At this point, I was still living in Chicago. I hadn't moved back to Los Angeles yet. I was living a few blocks away from the lake in Chicago with Christina. And here's kind of like another slight mirroring of two images. So I finished that show, and then Christina and I decided to move back to LA. I was also diagnosed with arthritis. So being in Chicago, it kind of got a little bit more difficult, because I was getting a little bit, like my joints were getting stiff, and we were going to go to New York or LA, and we both decided LA was maybe slightly the better option. Christina, because she'd already lived in New York, and then me, because I figured that being in the cold wouldn't be the best for me. But this is a show that I had in New York shortly after we moved to LA at Harpers, this is in the Upper East Side in their apartment. This show, this was like the first show where I was very conscious that it was going to be work that was like shown in a space as like a cohesive body of work. And so I was trying to have like an equal number of landscapes and then interiors. And I'd been to this space already in New York, so I kind of knew what I was getting into. And I also started sizing up too, because now I kind of like had the resources to do that. And I was still somewhat drawing on my experiences of being in Santa Cruz, like, you know, like a bit of anxiety and solitude, a kind of emergent themes that I was like revisiting. And so then after that, I had another show. This was a 2-person show in Paris. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna size up. And I started doing larger paintings. At this point, I started to feel the grind a little bit of just being in the studio. I was talking to Jennifer earlier, who were in the same studio building, about not having windows. And I was kind of clocking in and just like working away on these large paintings and going home and not even seeing the sunlight. So I felt even a little bit more estranged. I started to feel estranged a little bit from my own painting practice, since so much of it is about the natural world and the landscape, and I felt like I wasn't even spending time in it anymore. But I had like another show lined up after this. This was in Chicago, so I kind of just like kept it going. And this was sort of the last show that I had that was really, you know, where I was cranking out these like large paintings with Andrew Rafacz in Chicago. And then I was like, okay, I need to kind of like re-examine my priorities a little bit and kind of find like the heart of my painting practice again. So I started looking back at artists I really admired. This is a Gertrude Abercrombie painting. And she makes tons of like amazing small scale paintings. And I think I was just so exhausted from doing these like large paintings where I'd like paint for a couple days in a row and then like not be able to get out of bed the next day and then like be kind of like depressed. And so I was like, I just need to fix this. And so I started doing small works on paper, just on the kitchen table. And that was like very healing. I was still doing larger works, but I worked on these and I exhibited these with Andrew in Chicago. And then I had one last kind of like body of work that was shown of the larger paintings. This was in East Hampton with Harpers. And this kind of felt like the last like enunciation of my like time working in the studio on these like larger scale works on canvas. So after this show, I was like, I'm gonna take a beat, reassess what I'm doing, and like really kind of try to reimagine like what type of like life I want to live as an artist a little bit. So then Christina and I started Ouroboros, which is an artist critique group and somewhat of an alternative education project that we launched about in February of this year. Here's a photo of us in the studio that Claire took, who's also in the audience. Thanks, Claire. And our dog, Doobie. But yeah, so we basically decided to start a critique group to facilitate conversations and critiques for artists who might not have access to go to graduate school. The idea is that this could be for someone who's in graduate school and wants to keep having those conversations, someone who can't afford it, or someone who's kind of just maybe like critique curious. And we've been doing that for like the past almost a year now. And then at the same time, I was still looking at small scale paintings. I was looking at, this is Albert Pinkham Ryder. So I was kind of looking at his paintings. And I was like, okay, I kind of want to start making small scale oil paintings. I had gotten really fed up on canvas. I started having almost an allergic reaction to it where I'd feel sick if I was like slopping paint on like big canvas. So I then was also going to Houston to visit Christina's family, and the Menil there has a collection of really small paintings by Max Ernst. These paintings are about the size of a penny. And so I was like, okay, at this point I was like, I just really kind of need to scratch this itch. So I started doing these small paintings. Here's me with a cow in Santa Cruz that loosely mirrored this painting. And this is about, this painting's maybe like a few months old. This is like really kind of where I'm at today in the studio. I'm really honing in on my relationship with the environment. I'm trying to kind of explore these, you know, just this idea of like how much of the environment kind of creates my reality and how much of my reality is created in the environment. I started also, I mean, I have been going to a Zen center for a long time with doing Zen meditation, but with these paintings, it started to feel like there's a little bit more of a direct communication between the meditation practice and my personal practice of painting. So these are more the smallest. These are like 5 by 7. So like, you know, they're like, they're handheld paintings that are also, I kind of think of them as also apocalypse-friendly paintings, because when there were the fires in February, I just put a bunch of them in a box, and we stayed at Christine's house for a night, because we were worried Elysian Park was going to catch on fire. So I was like, oh, these are kind of, they're pretty handy. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been working on. I was like really rethinking the materiality of the painting too, which is actually something on the larger paintings that I kind of had stopped appreciating as much. Like I'm working on these with a really small brush and just dabbing away and kind of building them up in like small accumulation of marks where it's like literally like every mark matters. And that just like kind of rebuilt that connection. There's no drawings. It's kind of like everything unfolds on the wood panel. Here's another small painting I was looking at by Bob Thompson. I got like obsessed. I could only look at small paintings for a while. So it was kind of like really what I was ingesting. And then, yeah, here's another small painting. And then I sized up again a little bit, modest size, like a 30 by 40 inch, because I wanted to see if I could work larger again. This is also on a wood panel now. And then at this point I was like, okay, what are the other possibilities that the wood panel can afford me? So I started looking at kind of like murals. I also saw this on my trip to Italy. This is Livia's Garden, which was a painted dining room that's in Rome. And so I was kind of trying to figure out how I could make a painting that was slightly a little bit like wonkier than just a traditional painting on the wall. Like I wanted something that was maybe a little bit more of a stretch of the imagination. I love that there's even in the painted wall, there's like a wall painted on the wall that kind of is almost like keeping you in, which I like, just like love that feeling of, it's asking you to take like a leap and kind of imagine yourself in a garden. And then this is the Villa Savese panorama, which is here in LA, which my parents took me to a lot growing up. I don't know if anyone else has been here, but it's a traditional panorama that's kind of in like by USC. But I was also inspired by like really being engulfed in the painting as like the landscape kind of engulfing you. And so I started, here's another reference photo for the next piece. I started making these curved paintings, which I called panoramic fragments, that sit in the corner of two walls basically. And it was supposed to just kind of, they're these like long, thin strands of masonite that I paint. And that has been really fun to do. This is kind of another recent one. And this is my most recent presentation of works at Untitled Houston. Christine and I had a two-person booth there. I was showing these kind of like mid-scale works and then the curves. So here's, you kind of get an idea of how the curves are. And in the middle is one of Christina's paintings. He's going to be giving a talk next month. But yeah, that's kind of a summary of where I'm at. Yeah.
Okay, so thanks again for your presentation. It was, oh, thank you. Thanks again for your presentation. Yeah, I always forget how young you are, because you had such, I guess, a head start. Like I'm like, oh wow, you're really young. But like, I was thinking a lot, like, one of the first things I was thinking about, which you never really talked about modernism, I think, per se, in like, or like by quote in your lecture. But I think that you mentioned postmodernism in your like art summary that you sent. I forget. I don't know.
I might have, yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of the things that you're talking about really remind me of a kind of like the inside-outside architecture, and that sense of specifically alienation, like kind of deriving from a utopian dream gone wrong, which is just sort of how I think about modernism and postmodernism, as like a linear kind of like narrative path of history. So I was wondering if you think about this work in that way ever. Like, do you ever frame it within that modernism, postmodern conversation?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, especially the like architectural paintings are, I think, more maybe directly in conversation with that than the landscape ones. But yeah, definitely, like the kind of modernist architecture, Yeah, like that kind of failed hippie dream a little bit.
Right.
You know, a little
Right.
like The Inherent Vice, the book by Thomas Pynchon, like that kind of idea of
Right.
like maybe in the 60s and 70s where things like really started to go wrong. I was actually like born in San Francisco on Haight Street, so I was kind of feel like in like 95. So I was born almost like on the tail end, I feel like, of that utopian dream, like in that spot a little bit. Like it almost feels like something I like inherited maybe. Not majorly, like it's not like it's keeping me up at night, but but like I think it's like I was like almost like rooted in that a little bit, like with like the Waldorf schools, like, you know, like all of these kind of.
Do you mean that when San Francisco became more like business and tech heavy
Yeah.
as opposed to like the kind of hippie haven that it was?
Yeah, well, even the hippie haven I feel like was kind of polluted early on, you know,
Right.
but there's like this idea of like reaching for an ideal and then falling like pretty short, or
Right.
the ideal is like maybe failing to actually address some like realistic problems,
Right.
you know?
Right. Well, that's really interesting because when you were talking about UC Santa Cruz, I also went to kind of like a utopian, sort of post-hippie-esque school, which is in Cal Arts in Valencia. But like these schools that are, and even like the crit group that you're talking about starting, not to say that your dream is destined for dystopia from the outset, but it's just there's this sort of interesting thing that I think also is about growing up post that, because that still the 60s and the 70s still have such a like aura to them, and they're so attractive to people. I think that I heard that that's some sort of marketing thing, that it's one of the fail-safes, is like you kind of like set something around the hippies and like people like are gonna like it.
Yeah.
Because people are like so fascinated by that time period.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I think I definitely mistrust that, but then it can also be seduced by it a little bit, you know? And then I guess like in relationship to the paintings or Ouroboros too, you know, I'm definitely torn because it's like I feel like you also want to like strive for something that's like.
Well, you need community.
Yeah, you need community,
need a very
and
nice
like
community, yeah.
you know, it's like you don't want to just like not try to make the world a better place, or you don't want to be like, oh, like everything's kind of. I don't want to fall into that ennui or like existentialism too much, you know. But then it's like you also have to keep in mind that I feel like a lot of those things are.
Yeah, well, and also we live in the world, I mean, as I'm speaking specifically about LA, it's like that phrase, California is full of fruits and nuts, you know, like what is, Laura Owens did a sort of parody on that in a big art book, Fruits and Nuts. Anyway, but we're living in like the detritus of a lot of like cult-like stuff, and even ongoing, you know what I mean? Like, well, not to get in trouble, but like, you know, I live near the Scientology building, or like, you know, like, there's like literally just a lot of like, you know, Manson. We just rewatched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So there's a lot of stuff like that around here. It's unavoidable.
It is unavoidable. Yeah, it definitely is unavoidable.
But I also want to ask about your personal relationship with nature, because your work is a lot about that, and it seems like it's a big part of your childhood. But I was wondering if your relationship to nature, I think I wrote something about it here, like, do you have an intimacy with it that makes you bemoan the lack of it in mainstream society, or do you feel alienated from it yourself?
I mean, maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up like playing in like the garden. Like I said, like I grew up with like a nice garden in Echo Park, so it was still urban, but it was very much a garden. And then I would go visit my mom's family in England, so I'd be in the English countryside. And so I think a lot of those early experiences of nature kind of created like an intimacy, like kind of like a dreamy intimacy, where I would like really have like a longing to be in the landscape. I'm not like an experienced camper or like someone who like goes on like 5-hour hikes, but I think that in the paintings, that conversation is maybe more almost related to like an estrangement, I feel like, from like an inner nature, you know, like a lot of like, I guess contemporary life is about like shutting things up and like ignoring things, you know, like it's like you can't walk into a store without music playing, you can't kind of like, there's not many moments of silence. And I think that what I really took from nature was like that silence kind of enabled me to like strip off a lot of like maybe like conceptions or like inhibitions or these various things that kind of had like accumulated.
Yeah.
So there's maybe like a cleansing aspect to that, but then there's also maybe like an aspect that's like slightly uncanny, because when you start to maybe like disassemble your identity a little bit, things I think become a little tenuous, and like there's like an abstractness that maybe comes into play that's like slightly like disconcerting or uncanny. And so I think a lot of my figures are on the threshold of that, of like maybe wanting to be engulfed by nature, but then also like hanging back a little bit. And like, I don't think I'm trying to say that like our society is like deeply flawed and terrible, we need to like throw it out and like live in a new way. But more so just kind of like approach that with like an awareness, you know? It's like I don't want to like go to the woods and like live by myself. Like that's not something that's like particularly attractive to me.
Well, you know, it's funny because I was just, like I think I was watching a nature documentary. There's like one on Netflix that's about, it's like a horror nature documentary. And I feel like the way we're talking about nature is that kind of dipping in and out of it sort of feeling. Because what I thought about when I watched that documentary was like, nature is terrifying. Like you are just trying to not die like all the time. If you're like, you know, if you're like a frog by a river, like things are just trying to kill you all the time.
Yeah.
So it is kind of like I feel like if I go out to Joshua Tree, it's like a spiritual experience. You know, it's like I can feel like the vibrations of the air and it's beautiful and all these things. But if I just stayed out there, I would just die.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, because I would be like, I don't know how to do any. It would be like setting a dog free in the wild. Like, I would just have no idea what to do anymore.
Yeah. No, and I think that kind of speaks also a little bit to the estrangement, where I feel like I like lack all of those skills, you know? But then I still have a longing to be in nature, so that's also,
right.
you know, yeah.
Like a longing for a kind of like ancestral kind of relationship to this thing.
Yeah, maybe that, or even just kind of like, I think just being in nature, like even without like looking like that far back, if that makes sense, and just kind of like trying to figure out like what my current relationship is to the environment, like in that moment that I'm there, you know? Like it's almost like a reset, I feel like. But like part of that is facing like the fear, you know? But then also, you know, like those like survival worries like are things that are like, it's maybe amplified if you're completely by yourself in nature, but it's not like that's also not like present in a city. And so almost like by like being in nature almost like reminds me of like maybe my own scale or like mortality in that sense. And so like a lot of the figures are almost like dwarfed by the landscape in my paintings, which I think is maybe speaking to that. Like it's just like a reminder that like my specific like experience of consciousness is like pretty small in like relationship to a lot of the environments that I inhabit, particularly like natural environments.
Do you go hiking by yourself a lot?
No, I'll go for like walks in Elysian Park by myself or with my dog. But no, I'm not like a huge, like, you know, it's more like almost like a stolen moment that I like the best. If I have like a short moment in nature where I'm like alone, or like when I was in UC Santa Cruz, I'd walk up the pathway. Or when I was at Skowhegan, I would walk like up to the studio. And so it'd be like these like half hour, 15-minute walks alone. But it's not like I'm like looking to like camp out by myself and kind of do that type of searching.
Yeah, it almost seems like a kind of a romantic impulse or something. And
Yeah,
there
definitely.
does seem to be like a romantic quality to some of your works, like the lonely person in the big window. You know what I mean? Like the boy alone in a castle kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I definitely like really love like Caspar David Friedrich, like those kind of like romantic paintings. But I like them when there's like a tinge of something uncanny happening, which is why I love like Albert Pinkham Ryder, or these people where like maybe like Albert York, where there's like a tinge of like distress or like anxiety lurking below the surface.
Yeah, I was also, you know what else I'm like telling everyone how much I watch TV, but I was thinking a lot about like Severance, or even like, I don't know, like Terrence Malick's like Badlands, or like stuff where there's like, I mean, those are kind of different things, but Severance specifically, I was thinking about that because there's a lot of like stark environments. I don't know if you've seen any of it at all.
I haven't seen Severance, but I've seen Badlands.
Oh, okay. But like this idea of just like a very big landscape or like a very big interior and a person, they're different, but like this idea of like either place is kind of like alienating between figure and ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, definitely. Yeah, I also like, have you, like Michelangelo Antonioni's like Blow Up, or a lot of his films from like like Zabriskie Point. A lot of those films kind of capture that isolation that we were talking about, where the person kind of becomes increasingly like existentially isolated through their environment and like the social situations.
Yeah, that also feels like it has a relationship to like the 60s and hippies and like tripping out.
Yeah, definitely.
Or like, you know, like the psychedelic or CIA, paranoia, like we were talking about, what was the film that you were talking about? Just
Book, Inherent Vice. But it is also a film
But
too.
it was also a film. Yeah, this kind of like paranoia of maybe too much experimentation.
Yeah, definitely.
Like so much experimentation that you lose your sense of what's an experiment and what's reality.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Yeah, and I was also thinking on the romantic side about like those three big, I don't know where this is coming from, but it's something I've heard, like the man versus man, man versus God, man versus nature thing. It's like three different points of conflict that you can have in like, I don't know, a narrative or something like that. But do you think about that at all in terms of your work? Like, is there ever any hostility or between the relationship, or is it more just like a longing, a desire?
I mean, maybe not like a hostility, but maybe like a texture, you know? Like I feel like there's maybe like a sense of unknowing a little bit.
Maybe like fear, not hostility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe like not even fear, just like a unsureness. You know what I mean? Like, because I think like, I just like love the idea of a sense of mystery. And I think part of that is like, there's maybe a bit of fear, but it's also this kind of like anxiety of not knowing what's going to happen. It's almost like a trepidation or a feeling of being like on the precipice of something, which is not entirely fear-based, but maybe fear is an element of it, but it's like a little bit more complex than just like a base element of like primordial fear. It's maybe more like just like an open questioning.
So I'll just like ask briefly about your current direction before we like turn it over for questions. But so you and your partner have started a crit group. So how is this like feeding into that sense of like, I don't know, a knowing or guiding other people, talking with other people about their work?
I mean, we're not really like, I wouldn't call us like teachers. We're kind of just facilitating the group. You know, like we bring it together, we organize like gallerists to come and talk. We're really like facilitators more than like, I'm like disseminating knowledge, which I think maybe feeds back into my like trepidation around utopias or like alternative like school projects, which I like love, but like I definitely don't want to go that route too far. I found it just kind of enriching. It kind of like reminds me of like why I started painting in the first place. You know, because I feel like after having like a few years of like, I don't know, like you go to an art fair or like you go through like a couple shows and you start like looking at work a little differently. Like you're looking at it like a metric of like, I don't know, just like within this like really specific ecosystem, you're kind of like weighing it against like art history in this specific way, and you're not even really looking at the work anymore. Just after being almost like kind of like blinded by like a familiarity of like a specific perspective where like the work is like analyzed. Next to like
I mean, also in terms of market trends, or
exactly,
like oh, this work is like this, and this person's doing that, and you know what I mean, like where you get a little like, I don't know if cynical is the right word, but just kind of like, oh, I know what's going on here. Like it's not really. If you spend enough time in the art world, it's hard to feel like you're having a fresh moment.
Exactly, and I felt like I was really like when I was talking a little bit earlier about like when I kind of decided to kind of slow things down a little bit. I like really felt oversaturated in that, and I was like, I'm kind of losing my connection with painting. Like I just like very clearly like reached a stop. Like after I finished that last show, I was like trying to make more large paintings, and it just was like really not working. And so then Ouroboros kind of like rekindled that maybe more holistic perspective for me.
Like something to get excited about in a fresh way, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'm also like getting excited about like other people's artwork, you know, like I wasn't like spending all day looking at my own work. It's like very nice to just like sit and listen to someone else talk about their work for like a while, and then like recommend like artists or just like, I don't know, like have like a conversation, you know, it's a critique group, but it's not like we're like ripping work apart.
Right.
It's not really, I mean, like I'm sure those critiques are helpful for a lot of people, but it's much more about just like helping someone like strengthen their practice. And I think I maybe fall more into the belief system that it's like you have to kind of answer those questions yourself. Like I'm not gonna like tell someone like you need to like do this, this, and this, and your practice will be better. Like I'll suggest something, but like I don't know if the suggestion is gonna be helpful at the end of the day. But I still think that something competent or something like comes out of those discussions. And then how it relates to my own practice, I mean, one thing I did, which I was telling you beforehand, I started painting in the house a lot, and then using the studio almost as like a showroom, like for studio visits, and then like building things in the wood shop, like building the curves in the wood shop. And then I just paint under natural light, like in a very natural setting. And that kind of enables me, like I can take more time like preparing meals or like doing, like I do all of the cooking for my wife. Because I discovered I really liked cooking when I split. I was like, if I'm painting at the house, I don't have to drive like an hour. You know, I can like really spend time like cutting the vegetables or like preparing meat, which is like really nice actually. I feel like that like really, it's like painting has become a much more intimate part of my life, which I think also factors into, I also glossed over that, but like my Zen practice, which is like, I pretty much just like face the wall for half an hour every day. It's like very kind of like, austere is not quite the right word, but it's like not very flowery. Like I just sit, and it's kind of about like not, like maybe the way I integrate it into my life is like not really discriminating in importance, like what I do throughout the day. You know what I mean? Like preparing the meal, I should do the same attention as painting. And I think that spreading that weight more evenly, like with Ouroboros and everything, like puts me in a more balanced state, you know, as opposed to feeling like I felt like a little bit like I was like a production animal.
Right.
You know?
It is easy to feel like a workhorse sometimes when you're like really in the studio.
Which isn't like that. I'm not trying to even like shit on that really or anything. I just like, I was like, this is just like not really for me.
Right.
That specific model.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think it's a good time to turn it over. I'm sure there are some questions. We've gone over a lot of stuff.
I'll start the question. So, you talk about nature a lot in your artwork and all this stuff. How do you feel about like virtual environments in nature, right? Like, there's this movement of like VR and like super immersive VR. Do you ever think we'll get to a point where people are having the same kind of experiences in like virtual reality in the real world? Do you ever think we'll like intermesh?
Maybe, I don't know, you know? I mean, I'm not opposed to that if I could like put on a headset and go camping, but I don't think that would like prevent me from like also still going to nature, you know what I mean? But I mean, that could definitely be helpful for people, I think.
I think it would be helpful
as like a
for
therapy
people,
tool.
Yeah, like,
you know?
or that can't go into, like, that are institutionalized in some way, or like can't
Exactly.
move, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, so I'm not like anti any of that stuff. I think personally, like, as a painter, I'm excited in like the painting not being perfect. So it's like asking you to kind of take a leap into the imagination world a little bit more. I've done some like film, like a few projects, like experiments with like film that I've still kind of worked out. And I've kind of like thought about that. You know, I used to like really love playing like video games, and that like inspired landscapes in me like a little bit, like playing like my Game Boy and stuff when I was little. So I could see the virtual world kind of, you know, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I could see that in a little bit of your paintings, because you know how sometimes you end up in like a really big environment by yourself. Like, I forget, I think I used to play like Zelda or something.
Yeah, I feel like
and I'd
those
be
type
like, whoa, like I'm the only one here, you know?
Yeah, and especially when I was like playing that in like, I don't know, like early 2000s, it was like really bad graphics. So it's like, but it was still like kind of a vibrant world in my mind. So yeah.
It's over there.
I was really interested by how you talked about when you got obsessed with going small, and you mentioned that you like there's no drawings and it kind of like freed you up. Maybe not to project, but I'm curious if like as you went back, you scaled up again. Are there the things you took from the small era that you still kind of like lock into? Like, do you still not really use drawings as much? Did it change your process? You scaled back?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm still like fully in the small era. Like the small paintings have kind of become my bread and butter. Like I do those like almost every day. I think so with that, I also switched like a small wood panel, which is maybe more of like nerdy painter stuff. But like the wood surface, I was painting on it with clear gesso. So I'm painting basically on like a straight wood surface, which is almost like having an underpainting to begin with. And like it's more rigid. So I'm using less paint. So I'm able to use kind of like nicer paint. And it's like a lot of like dabbing, like just like with a brush and like built like through accumulation and almost like sculpting, which I wasn't doing with the larger paintings. It was like big brush strokes and like building it through that. And so I think it's like that small like tinkering with the paintings, like that really opened up a lot for me. And so then that did count. I was like, oh, I can just do this on a larger scale with the wood. And it took me a little bit to figure out exactly how to do that. But yeah, I definitely took that from the small paintings, and I'm still very much like the small paintings. Like I don't know, I'm gonna keep them going. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak to the role of the figure in your work. It feels like oftentimes, like the way I perceive it as the viewer is sometimes the figure is like maybe activating the way that the viewer could work their way through the painting, but also sometimes I think it feels like your work would like function really well also without the figure, but I know it's like very important to you. So could you speak to, what symbolically the figure is, different explorations of them with that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I have done a few without the figure, but typically, yeah, the figure, there's always something like it's like an animal or a person that's kind of exploring the environment. It's kind of a way for me to put myself in the environment. Like you said, it's almost like a navigational guide to like how one could navigate the space and like picture themselves in the actual space. Oftentimes it's kind of like putting my own idea of self in it. So even if it's like a feminine figure with a dress, it's still supposed to vaguely be me. If it's an animal, it's still vaguely supposed to be me kind of like inhabiting the space. And I think that kind of going back to what we were talking about of like the tension between like maybe like a self that's like much more rooted in like identity, like I'm defined kind of like with these hard edges versus like the natural world, which I feel like is defined by much softer edges, in that like, you know, like the dog isn't like discriminating so hard between like where its nervous system ends and the environment begins, you know. Like my dog, for example, we've noticed like if I get anxious, he's a little bit over-attached, but like he'll get anxious. And I'm like, oh, like I think that like I'm maybe a little bit stressed out. And it's, you know, like I think I'm basically like not as aware of how much like I'm feeding into my environment or the environment is feeding into me as I would like to think I am. And so like having the person or something navigating that is a way for me to kind of almost remind myself of that.
It's also interesting because it feels like the figure causes the viewer to also be in this like removed position from the landscape, almost in the same way that you're describing you have your own experience where you like to be like glancing or checking in on the landscape, but not like fully immersed in it, which I think is like an interesting positioning. I don't have language for it, but I feel like there's like many layers of depth that you're creating for the viewing experience by having it.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think also I used to have these dreams when I was little of like flying over these like vast landscapes, like from a kind of a bird's eye view. And they would kind of be these like miraculous, like dreamlike landscapes that I would like really want to explore, but I wasn't able to due to the distance. I think Rebecca Solnit has like a really nice piece of writing where she talks about like longing for the horizon. And I think that removal, like the figure really creates the distance, as does the horizon line. And I think that removal of wanting to explore something and being unable to is like kind of a tantalizing space to inhabit. There's also maybe something a little with the smaller ones, not quite voyeuristic's maybe the wrong word, but like a little voyeuristic where you're prevented from like really being in the space, but it's this like small window. You know, I kind of feel like the small paintings are almost like a small garden that you've like snuck into. And then like the larger paintings are like maybe more akin to like being in a public park with like lots of people, like the experience is like very open. Not that one's better than the other, kind of like being able to have both. But the small paintings especially, like only one person can really look at them at a time, because some of them are like the size of like a, like my thumb.
Do we have one more, or should we call it?
Question. Notice those thick half-pipe looking canvases in the back. Also, you grew up skating. Did skateboarding kind of impact? How did it impact some of your work?
I mean, I feel like probably the first way would be like work ethic. Kind of you skate too, so I think it's like when there's like a persistence you need to have, and then I think also one way that skating, like I don't think I had like a sense of direction or space until I started skating, because growing up in LA, there's like a lot of skateboarding that's available, and so I would be watching these videos, and then I'd be driving by like the video, like where the place was filmed, and so I suddenly had like an understanding, like an architectural understanding of the city, like based on like where the different skate spots were. And so then I like really kind of understood the skating. Like I'm like, oh, like here's like a stair set, or here's like a, like a bank, like a piece of cement that like, is like kind of famous to a small group of people. And it was like, I was like 10, so it was like right around that age that I really was able, like I started orienting myself in the environment. And then definitely the Masonite too, I was probably like slightly influenced by half pipes, because I knew you could bend Masonite because a lot of skate ramps are built with bent Masonite. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you again, Ish. And also, make sure to come back, because we have Andreas Payan, who's going to be doing an art talk on October 30th. And then Christina Valentine will be here November, 13th? 13th, yeah. And we also have a really great exhibition going on, curated by Monzon Gallery. So come back sometime to see it. Thank you all for coming, and thank you again to Ish for sharing your work with us.
Yeah, thank you.